Watering. There's a lot of misinformation about when to water, if you should water, and watering in general as it pertains to heat waves. Right now in Michigan, we are having a massive heat wave, and all around the country, people are freaking out because temperatures are soaring and they're worried about their gardens, and our inbox has been inundated with questions about heat. And so I wanted to make this episode to set aside some myths and misinformations about watering, answer some of the questions that you had about watering, and really help people out, because I think one of the biggest things that you can do is panic. One of the worst things you can do is kind of lose your head and not think as it pertains to watering, because watering is the most important component about a garden. Without it, I mean, plants are 90% water. So without the water, you have 10% of remaining matter, and that does not make up enough to sustain life. So the first component of this video, I want to break down a misconception about watering as it pertains to questions that we get about should I water and when should I water. I'm going to clump these together because they do really go together, and it's going to be able to answer both these questions at once and kind of save some time. So the first answer to that is yes, you should be watering during a heat wave. Not watering is one of the worst things you can do for your garden. Plants have a stressor that actually happens when they are under heat and they do not have good soil moisture. It causes the leaves to wilt, and it's actually a reaction that helps them to conserve moisture, because their leaves are giant solar panels and they generate energy from the sun. However, if that sun is what is hurting them, they're going to curl downwards, reduce the amount of exposure that they have, therefore reducing the amount of evaporation that's going to be leaving the plant. That is actually a form of stress. And so many people want to, they want to say, well, okay, I mean, this plant is handling the stress naturally, and therefore it's actually going to be worse to water because I risk boiling the roots. And there is some truth to that you can boil the roots and you can burn the roots by watering during the heat of the day. But there is a big but to that. You can reduce your stress by almost 100%, almost completely reduce that stress. In fact, our pumpkins are completely taut. They're not limp whatsoever. Like I said, it's just hit 95 degrees today. It had a heat index of over 100 degrees, and tomorrow it's supposed to be 100 degrees. Saturday it's supposed to be 102 degrees, and Sunday it's supposed to be 103 degrees. So we're going through an absolutely insane heat wave here, and these pumpkins are just handling the stress so well. They're handling the heat so well without any signs of stress, I should say. And so having the soil moisture in the soil is critical. And that means, to answer the second question, when should you be watering? During the morning and the evening. Having soil moisture will do so many things, but the biggest thing that it does is it actually acts as an insulator. Your soil is filled with air pockets, and those air pockets are great insulators, but they only do so well. What happens is, over time, the soil begins to heat up, and those air pockets are an insulator, but they also begin to heat up, and that leads to evaporation. But if you have water in your soil in good amounts, what happens is it's actually the exact same process that happens during cold weather, where farmers will spray their crops if there's a risk of frost. They spray their crops with water, or you might use wall of waters around your tomato plants or other tender plants, because the freezing temperatures will actually put the freezing energy into freezing the water before it's able to get through that barrier and touch your plant tissue, your leaves or your fruit or your flowers, things like that. And so it's one of the worst things you could do to not have soil moisture, because that moisture in your soil during 110 degree day, you'll find that in soil that is moist and rich in water, the soil temperatures are about 65 to 80 degrees. And that is perfect for things like corn and strawberries, squash. All your summer crops thrive in warm temperatures, and so they'll actually do just fine. The temperatures are more than fine for them to survive. But when they go dry is when the soil temperatures can climb to 100 degrees, 120 degrees, and that does another thing. What happens is that when it does dry out and does heat up, your roots, not only will they bake and they will also risk dying, but the soil microbes, the fungi, the bacteria, what happens is they also can die as well. And then you have soil that is essentially void of life. And as we talk about that life, as we talk about all the time on this channel, that life is what is so important to keeping your plants healthy, stress-free. They help actually mine minerals for the plant and mine nutrients for the plant. And like we talked about in our just recently in our episode called 75% of your nutrients come from this, as long as it's organic. This portion of that title was beneficial fungi. If you lose your beneficial fungi, your plants will then show signs of nutrient deficiencies, which so many people complain about after hot weather. And there's no doubt in my mind that the reason why they're having nutrient deficiencies is because the things gathering those nutrients, being the beneficial bacteria and fungi, they're gone, they're dead. Had there been adequate moisture, they would not be dead and the plants would be just as fine as they ever were. The next big bit of misinformation around watering is, as we just touched on when to water, morning and night, is watering at night. So many people say, don't water at night, you're going to get powdery mildew and you're going to get blight. This is totally not true, especially during a heat wave. The only time where this could be true is during cool and cold weather later in the season when your plants are stressed. Watering during the evening is absolutely fine, and it's actually a great way for the plants to take up a lot of that moisture in the soil without risking having it evaporate away from them. So they will actually begin to actually absorb that moisture during the evening, and that helps them to stay stress-free during the next day. And when you water in the morning the next day, that's going to keep the moisture in the soil, which, as we talked about, is going to help keep the soil cool throughout the heat of the day. And then you water in the evening again. So that is the kind of cycle that you water. And the reason why you don't have to worry about disease is because when you're going through a heat wave, you're in mid-season, there is so much evaporation that occurs off of the surface of leaves that I can water at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and by 11 o'clock at night, it's completely dry. And so that's not long enough for the plants to get diseased. That's not long enough for fungus spores and mildew spores to inhabit. And on top of that, during mid-season when there's solar radiation at its highest, it's actually too much solar radiation for fungus and things like blight and powdery mildew to take hold on your plants. And therefore, you really don't have much to worry about, because even if they did land, they're not going to actually have an inhabitable environment for them to live on. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation about when to water, because you hear so much stuff, and some of it's based in truth, but it's not always based 100% in truth. The next minor bit of misinformation that I'm not really sure where it comes from, so maybe you can help me in the comments box below, is not to use drip irrigation during a heat wave. I'm not really even sure where this one comes from, and a lot of the concerns have to do with things leaching into their water. And what I can say about that is that you should be using your drip irrigation, you should be using your hoses, but make sure you replace your hoses or your drip irrigation if you have not had them, or if you've had them longer than, say, 10 years. Most hoses and drip irrigation is BPA free and is certainly should be free of lead. All of these products have to clear some EPA standards, and that means that they have to be free of lead, they have to be free of heavy metals, and they have to, most of them, if they're used for potable water, have to be free of BPA. And that means that your garden should be relatively free of these chemicals, and any sun exposure that's actually hitting your hoses and your drip irrigation systems, at the very least, it's going to just break down the material if it's something that solarizes and begins to degrade in weather, which most of them don't anyways. So again, I'm not sure where that is really coming from, but you'd be shocked. In just this week alone, I've had 5 people message me saying, I'm afraid to use my drip irrigation during this heat wave we're having. And again, I don't know why. So use it, absolutely use it. The very final thing that I wanted to talk about as a word of caution during a heat wave is make sure, even if it's at night or in the morning, make sure you do not spray your plants with the first water that comes out of your hose. Just in the period of time that this hose has been sitting out here, it started cool. Our water started out cold because I was watering. The sun is setting, so we're okay. Don't worry, I'm not watering during the heat of the day. It's about 7 o'clock at night, so we're okay. But I was watering, the soil was cool, or the water was cool. There's still sun out, obviously, so it's hitting me. And there's enough heat in the air to heat this up to pretty hot temperature. And what that can do is if you have water during the heat of the day, now this is like if it sets out all day long, your water can be 150 or so degrees. I mean, you can heat up very, very hot. And not only could that possibly burn you, but it could also easily burn your plants. Make sure if you're watering with a hose or you're watering with something that can that absorbs heat, make sure you drain some of that hot water out to the ground first until it starts to turn cool. And that is just a little mindful tip, because I can't tell you, I've done it now 3 times in my life that I can remember, where I watered my plants with water that was coming right out of a hose from the heat of the day, and within hours the plants started just wilting and dying. And it's because I absolutely fried the life out of my plants. And once you do that, there's just absolutely no going back. And it's often deceiving. I mean, you think of a hose, it feels cool to the touch. I mean, you don't even think anything of it. It honestly does not feel that hot. But if I spray it, it's actually really hot. So the outside feels cool, and that's just, it's such a deceptive thing that, you know, your hose might sit there all evening, and you might go to water at night. It might be like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Spray that hot water out, because it could easily hold that water in. And remember, anything above 100 degrees is dangerous for your plants. So just make sure to keep the cool water on them and not the hot. So just a little tidbit that is often so overlooked when it comes to watering. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, give this video a huge thumbs up. I gotta go inside. Stay hydrated, folks. You're mostly made up of water, so you gotta have some water too. And I gotta go in, I gotta get something to drink and stay out of the heat. So as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow, bake, or go home. We'll catch you on tomorrow's episode. It's gonna be another hot one. All right, see ya.